I didn't pull my hand away. That's the part that keeps replaying in my head. Not the way he looked at me, not the silence in the room, not even the fact that my husband's coat was hanging just a few feet from us on the back of the chair. It was my wrist. He only touched my wrist. We were standing in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed. The sink was still running in a thin stream because I'd forgotten to turn it off completely. The light above the stove hummed softly. It was almost midnight. He reached for a glass, and somehow his fingers brushed against the inside of my wrist. That soft, vulnerable place where the skin is thinner. Where your pulse lives. He didn't grab me. He didn't slide his hand up my arm. He just rested there. 2 fingers. Light pressure. Right over my pulse. And he felt it. I know he did because his eyes flickered down for half a second, just enough to notice the rhythm under his touch. Just enough to realize it wasn't steady. Mine was racing. The air shifted. The hum of the fridge felt louder. The water in the sink kept whispering into the drain. Neither of us moved. I could feel the warmth of his hand spreading slowly into my skin. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. My shoulders tightened, my breath grew shallow, and that small place beneath his fingers started to throb harder. He didn't say a word. That was the worst part. If he had joked, if he had apologized, if he had stepped back, I could have laughed it off. I could have blamed the wine, the late hour, the exhaustion. But he stayed. His thumb shifted slightly, just enough to adjust, just enough to feel me more clearly. And I let him. My wedding ring felt heavier than usual. It pressed cold against my other hand as I gripped the edge of the counter. I stared at the tile backsplash like it could save me. "Your heart's going fast," he said quietly. His voice was low. Not teasing. Not innocent either. I swallowed. I could hear it in the silence. "It's late," I replied. My voice sounded strange, softer, thinner. But he didn't remove his hand. His fingers were warm, steady, patient, and my pulse kept betraying me. In that kitchen, with the faucet still running and the hallway dark behind us, there was a choice hanging between us. Invisible, fragile, electric. All he had to do was slide his hand higher. All I had to do was step back. Neither of us moved. And that was the moment I realized. I didn't want him to. I should have stepped back. That's what a good wife would have done. Turned off the faucet. Laughed it away. Said goodnight. Instead, I turned the water off with my free hand, slowly, carefully. Like any sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile thing had formed between us. The kitchen went quiet. Too quiet. His fingers were still resting against my wrist, and now that the water wasn't running, I could hear everything. The faint ticking of the clock above the doorway. The soft fabric of his sleeve brushing my skin when he shifted his weight. My own breathing, uneven, shallow. He looked at me then. Not at my hand. At my face. His eyes weren't hungry. That would have been easier to fight. They were searching. Careful. Like he was waiting for permission without asking for it. I could feel my pulse under his touch, frantic, disobedient. And he didn't move away. "You're shaking," he murmured. I hadn't realized I was. A small tremor ran through my fingers, barely visible, but he felt it. His thumb pressed just slightly firmer, not restraining me, just grounding me. Warm. Steady. And my body leaned into it before I could stop myself. It wasn't obvious. Just a shift of weight. A half-inch closer. But the space between us thinned. The hallway light flicked off automatically, plunging the house into deeper darkness. Only the kitchen light remained, casting soft shadows along the cabinets. His face looked different in that glow, sharper, more intimate. "Don't," I whispered. But I didn't move my hand. He exhaled slowly, and I felt that breath skim across my cheek. "Close. Too close." "I'm not doing anything," he said. And technically he wasn't. That was the danger of it. 2 fingers on my wrist. That's all. But the heat had traveled up my arm now, settling somewhere low in my chest, spreading outward in slow waves. My skin felt too tight, too aware. I became hyper-conscious of every detail. The way his sleeve was rolled up just enough to reveal the strong line of his forearm. The faint scent of his cologne mixed with dish soap and something warmer underneath. The way his gaze kept dropping. Not to my lips, not anywhere obvious, just to the space between us like he was measuring it. "Say it," he said quietly. His hand hadn't moved. Say you want me to stop. My throat tightened. The clock ticked once. Twice. My wedding ring caught the light as I shifted my fingers against the counter. I stared at it. At the thin gold band. At the promise it represented. And still, I didn't pull away. Because the truth was the only thing louder than my guilt was my pulse beneath his touch. The silence after he said it stretched thin. Say you want me to stop. His voice wasn't demanding. It was calm. Almost gentle. But it settled into my skin like heat. I could have ended it right there. All I had to do was speak. Instead, I lifted my eyes from my ring and looked at him. That was my mistake. Because the second our eyes locked, something shifted. His fingers didn't tighten, didn't claim more of me. But the air between us thickened. Charged. A quiet understanding passing without language. My voice faltered. The clock ticked again. My pulse thudded against his touch, harder now, erratic. I could feel it everywhere. In my throat. Behind my ribs. Between breaths that refused to steady. He took half a step closer. Not enough to touch anywhere else. Just enough that the warmth of his body reached mine without contact. I felt it through the thin fabric of my blouse, like standing too close to a fire you know you shouldn't lean into. You don't look like you want me to stop, he said softly. There was no arrogance in it. Just observation. My fingers curled slightly against the counter. The cool stone beneath my palm was the only thing keeping me grounded. The rest of me felt untethered. This is wrong, I whispered. He didn't argue. His gaze dropped briefly to where his hand rested on my wrist. His thumb traced the faintest line upward, barely an inch, following the delicate vein there. It was the smallest movement, but it felt like lightning. My breath hitched. My shoulders tightened. And still, I didn't pull away. You're married, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. The word married hung heavy in the kitchen. Heavier than the silence. Heavier than the night pressing against the windows. Yes. The answer left my mouth, but my body betrayed me again. Leaning the slightest fraction closer, my wrist turning subtly in his hold, exposing more skin without meaning to. Or maybe I did mean to. His fingers adjusted, following that movement naturally. Slowly. As if giving me time to reconsider. My heart was beating so loudly I wondered if he could hear it outside of his touch. Somewhere down the hall a floorboard creaked. The house settling. Or a reminder. I froze. His hand stilled too. For a moment we both listened. The darkness remained quiet. And in that suspended second caught between fear and longing, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't waiting for him to move. I was waiting for myself to stop him. And I still hadn't. The floorboard didn't creak again. The house stayed still. Quiet. Unaware. But something inside me had shifted. A line had been crossed. Not physically, not yet, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere quieter. He looked down the hallway once more. Then back at me. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his other hand. Not to grab me. Not to pull me closer. Just to rest it on the counter beside my hip. Now I was standing between his arm and the edge of the kitchen. Not trapped. Just held in place by proximity. My wrist was still in his hand. My pulse still unsteady. His thumb traced another small arc upward, barely grazing the sensitive skin along my inner arm. The movement was slow enough that I could have stopped it at any second. I didn't. My breath grew louder in the quiet kitchen. I could hear his too controlled but deeper than before. Look at me, he said softly. I hadn't realized I'd been staring at the space between us again. When I lifted my gaze, the intensity in his eyes almost undid me. Not wild. Not reckless. Just focused. Intent. His fingers shifted slightly, sliding from my wrist to the base of my palm. His touch was warmer there, broader. My hand felt small inside his. He turned it gently, exposing the inside of my wrist again, as if that fragile spot held all the answers. Your heart's still racing, he murmured. And then, without breaking eye contact, he leaned closer. Not enough to kiss me. Just enough that his breath brushed across my lips. That was it. That soft, warm exhale. It sent a wave through me, from my wrist to my chest, down my spine, settling somewhere low and aching. My fingers twitched in his hold. Stop, I whispered again. But my voice had changed. It wasn't firm. It wasn't convincing. It sounded like a plea. His jaw tightened slightly at the sound of it. I saw the restraint there, the fight. He wasn't forcing anything. He was waiting. Always waiting. For me. My free hand lifted without permission, hovering awkwardly in the air for a second before landing lightly against his chest. I could feel his heartbeat under my palm. Strong. Steady. Controlled. So different from mine. We stayed like that, my hand on him, his fingers wrapped around my pulse, both of us breathing in the same narrow space. The kitchen light flickered faintly above us. "Tell me to go," he said. My fingers pressed slightly into his shirt. I felt the warmth beneath it, the strength, the nearness. And for the first time that night, I stopped pretending I wanted him to. My hand was still on his chest. I could feel the steady rise and fall beneath my palm. Warm. Controlled. So different from the storm inside me. "Tell me to go." His voice was lower now, rougher around the edges. I didn't answer. Instead, my fingers curled slightly into the fabric of his shirt. Not pulling him closer. Not pushing him away. Just holding. The air between our mouths was barely there anymore. I could feel the warmth of his breath against my lips, soft and rhythmic. Every exhale brushed over me like a question. My wrist was still in his hand, but now his grip had softened, no longer measuring my pulse, just cradling it. His thumb rested against the inside of my wrist, unmoving, like he understood that even the slightest shift could undo us both. The kitchen light cast a golden glow over his face. I noticed the faint shadow along his jaw, the tension there. His eyes flickered once to my mouth, just once, then back up to meet mine. That look did something to me. It wasn't hunger. It was restraint. And somehow that was worse. "You're shaking again," he said quietly. I was. Not from fear. From the effort of standing still. Somewhere down the hall, the air vent clicked on, sending a soft rush of sound through the house. It made the moment feel smaller. More hidden. Like the world had narrowed down to the space between our bodies. "I can't," I whispered. But I didn't move my hand. His fingers tightened just slightly around mine, enough to remind me he was there. Enough to anchor me to this choice. "You can," he replied. The confidence in his voice wasn't about him. It was about me. My wedding ring brushed against his chest as my hand shifted. The metal felt cold against the warmth beneath his shirt. The contrast sent a sharp flicker of guilt through me. I closed my eyes for a second, and in that darkness, everything became sensation. His breath. His warmth. His fingers against my skin. My pulse wild and desperate beneath his touch. When I opened my eyes again, he was watching me. Not moving, not rushing, just waiting. I felt the final thread of resistance stretch thin inside me. I knew that if I leaned forward even an inch, it would happen. And the terrifying truth? I wasn't afraid of him closing the distance. I was afraid of how much I wanted to. I don't remember deciding to move. I just remember the moment our breathing fell into the same rhythm. Slow. Heavy. Close. My fingers were still twisted lightly in his shirt when I felt it, that almost invisible shift forward. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was both of us surrendering at the exact same time. The space between our mouths disappeared. Not in a rush. Not in a crash of impulse. In a pause. A suspended second where his nose brushed mine, where our foreheads nearly touched, where my pulse pounded so hard I felt dizzy with it. "Last chance," he whispered. His thumb pressed once more against the inside of my wrist, right over that frantic beat, like he was asking my body instead of me. I could have stepped back. Instead, I let my eyes close. That was my answer. The first touch of his lips wasn't urgent. It was warm. Testing. Barely there. A question pressed softly against my mouth. And when I didn't pull away, when my fingers tightened against his chest and my breath caught in my throat, the kiss deepened slowly, carefully, like he was still giving me time to change my mind. I didn't. My free hand slid upward, from his chest to his shoulder. I felt the solid curve of it under my palm, the heat through the thin fabric. The reality of him. His hand left my wrist. For a split second I felt the loss of it, the sudden absence of that grounding pressure. Then his fingers brushed up along my arm instead. Not grabbing. Tracing. Following the same path his thumb had explored earlier, only higher now. From wrist to forearm. From forearm to elbow. Slow enough that every inch of skin registered the movement. The kiss shifted, still restrained but no longer questioning. His other hand moved from the counter to my waist, hovering there for half a breath before settling gently against my side. The contact sent a wave through me. My body leaned into him fully now, closing whatever invisible gap had remained. I felt the heat of him against me, steady and undeniable. The kitchen felt smaller, warmer. The clock ticked again, but it sounded distant, unimportant, because in that moment, there was no husband asleep down the hall. No promises, no future consequences, just warmth, just breath, just the slow unraveling of something I had been holding in for far too long. When he finally pulled back slightly, his forehead rested against mine. We stayed like that, breathing the same air. "You're going to regret this," he murmured. Maybe I would. But as my hands remained on him, and his thumb found my pulse again, this time not to test it but to feel it race, I realized something terrifying. Regret had already lost to desire. His forehead rested against mine, warm and steady. "You're going to regret this." The words lingered between us, softer than the hum of the refrigerator, heavier than the ring on my finger. I should have stepped away then. Instead, I opened my eyes. He was close enough that I could see the faint shift in his expression. Not triumph, not victory. Something more fragile. Like he was just as aware of the edge we were standing on. My hands were still on him. One at his shoulder. The other slowly sliding from his chest down to the center of his torso, feeling the rise and fall of each breath. The contact was unhurried. Intentional. His hand at my waist tightened just slightly, thumb brushing along the curve of my side beneath the thin fabric of my blouse. Not claiming. Just exploring the outline like he was memorizing it. My pulse was still racing, but it had changed. It wasn't panicked anymore. It was hungry. He kissed me again, slower this time. Deeper. Not demanding, just certain. My back met the cool edge of the counter, grounding me for half a second before his warmth erased the chill. The contrast made me gasp softly into his mouth. His fingers moved from my waist, trailing upward along my ribs. The path was patient, almost reverent. Every inch deliberate, like he was giving me time to stop him. I didn't. Instead, my hand found the back of his neck. My fingertips pressed into his skin, feeling the tension there. He exhaled against my lips, and that sound, that quiet surrender, made my knees weaken slightly. The kitchen light flickered again. Felt like a warning. Or maybe applause. His hand returned to my wrist. That same vulnerable place. Only this time he didn't measure my pulse. He lifted my hand slowly, guiding it upward, until my palm rested against his chest again. Over his heart. "Feel that," he whispered. It wasn't as steady anymore. We stood there, both of us breathing harder now, hearts beating against each other through skin and fabric and all the promises we were breaking. The hallway behind him was still dark. The house still quiet. Every second stretched long and thin, fragile as glass. His mouth brushed along my jaw, then lower, slow enough that I felt every inch of the path he took. My head tilted back against the cabinet without thinking, exposing more of myself to him. And in that moment, with his hand warm around my wrist, his breath against my skin, my ring pressing cold against his chest, I realized something. The silence wasn't guilt anymore. It was permission. His mouth lingered just below my ear, warm and unhurried. Every breath he let out grazed my skin like a secret being shared. My fingers were still threaded into his hair at the back of his neck, holding him there. Not pushing, not pulling. Just keeping him close enough that I could feel the heat of him. The kitchen felt smaller now. The counter pressed into my lower back. The overhead light hummed faintly above us. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary space. Nothing about this was ordinary. His hand slid from my wrist down into my palm, our fingers slowly intertwining. That small shift, that simple act felt more intimate than anything else. Like we had crossed from impulse into something intentional. "You're still shaking," he murmured against my skin. I was. But it wasn't hesitation anymore. It was anticipation. My head tipped slightly to the side as his lips traced a slow path along my jaw again. My breath left me in a quiet exhale, barely louder than the ticking clock. And then, a sound. Not from us. From the hallway. A soft thud. The unmistakable shift of weight on wood flooring. We both froze. His lips stopped moving. His hand tightened instinctively around mine. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it might echo through the house. Another sound. Closer this time. A door handle turning. The air between us snapped back into reality. He stepped away first. Just one step. But it felt like falling. The sudden absence of his warmth left my skin tingling, exposed. My hand dropped from his neck. My fingers were still trembling as I smoothed my blouse, adjusting it with hands that didn't feel like my own. The hallway light flicked on. I saw it spill across the kitchen floor before I heard the voice. "Hey, you're still up?" My husband stood at the end of the hall, squinting slightly in the brightness. I swallowed. The taste of someone else was still on my lips. "Yeah," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. "Just getting water." Beside me, he picked up the glass from the counter, lifting it casually to his mouth like nothing had happened. Like my pulse hadn't betrayed me minutes ago. Like his hands hadn't memorized the shape of my skin. My husband yawned, rubbing the back of his neck. "Come to bed." His eyes flicked briefly between us. Too briefly. "Okay," I answered. I felt it then, that final dangerous thing. Not guilt. Not shame. But the memory of warmth still lingering on my wrist, where his fingers had first found my pulse. As I walked past him down the hallway, our shoulders brushed. Accidental. Silent. Electric. And when I slipped into bed beside my husband minutes later, staring at the ceiling in the dark, I pressed my fingers to my own wrist. My pulse was still racing. And for the first time in years, it wasn't because of the man lying next to me.